Okay, good morning. Ben and I are going to share a little bit about our faith journey through becoming foster parents and adoption, and what that looked like as far as connected to community care. So it was a February night. We were watching a movie, and I get a phone call, and I know this number well enough to know they're not calling at 9 o'clock just to chat. Pick it up. They ask, can you take 2 brothers? They need placement tonight. They're 4 years and 10 months old. One of them has a medical condition. She told us what it was. We're Googling. It can be anything from very minor to very high care. And we're thinking, their mom, a single mom, has been taking care of him at home by herself. We could do this. So 2 hours later, 2 little boys are dropped off with us. The caseworker knows nothing about the medical needs. Mom had had time before she said goodbye to her boys to send them off to a stranger's home. She had had time to write down on a piece of notebook paper, these are the medications, this is how much you give, these are the appointments coming up. And we looked at this going, what? He has a G-tube. We don't know how to do this. And the person who had called us for the placement had been a longtime family friend of Ben's family, and so she had come over to help us make sure that we had all of the paperwork signed and kind of got settled for the night. We're sitting there. This 10-month-old has already missed 2 of his feedings. What do we do? How does this work? This is terrifying. Not only are we suddenly thrown in the deep end, these boys who don't know us. The 4-year-old calls us auntie and uncle because his mom and caseworker told them, you're going to a safe place, I know them, it's okay. And I say, wait, we know someone. We have a good friend who's been a NICU nurse for years. 10:30 at night, I call him, hi Chris. He said he knew we were getting a placement. We had sent out a text to our close friends saying, it's happening. We don't know these kiddos, they're showing up at our door tonight. I call him, I say, we don't know what we're doing. He says, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Shows up in his sweatpants, stays with us for an hour and a half, explaining a G-tube, how to do the feeds, how to hook everything up, what the medications are for, how to administer them properly. So this comes 2 weeks after we had finally been licensed as foster parents. In the summer of 2018, I was sitting on a friend's couch folding her laundry as she fed her newborn baby, and we were talking about the recent news of children being separated from their families at our southern border, and how these kids were separated from their families and they needed people to care for these kids as they deported their parents back to south of the US border. And I said something to the effect of, like, I wish we could go down and care for these kids and help them reunite. And she just kind of looked at me. She said, we have kids in Colorado that need this. There are today over 3,590 kids in foster care in the state of Colorado. And so I sat on that, and I'm not a person to usually sit on something. I have an idea, and I say, we're doing this. And the Holy Spirit was just like, just wait, just sit on it. So I was like, I'll sit on it for 2 or 3 days max. So finally we're driving down the road, and I said, I have this idea of a way we could connect with our community. We could become foster parents. That's crazy, I know. But we have a spare room. We have the resources. We have the community. So that started the conversation of talking with our core community, saying, we think that this is what God is calling us into next, but we're going to need you. We can't do this on our own. We're going to need you to show up. And we didn't know what that meant exactly. We didn't know that was a call at 10:30 at night saying, please come over and help us. We didn't know that that would mean weeks of meals. We didn't know that this little 10-month-old, we didn't know anything. His G-tube came out the day after he came to us, and I'm running around to hospitals trying to figure out what to do. I had a friend say, I'm going to drive you. I'm going to bring you food. What do you want to eat? So she showed up at the emergency department. She drove us from one emergency department down to Children's Hospital in Denver. She brought me food. She drove so that I could make calls to caseworkers and insurance and everything on the way, showing up in her capacity as I showed up in my capacity, which felt really slim at that time. So those are just some of the ways that we were met with being supported in what we felt called to next with our first boys, who were with us for 2.5, 3 months, which is very short in the world of foster care. But they were able to reunify with their mom and then ended up in and out of foster care for the next several years. But we would do respite care, which is they're not placed in our home, and we are not their foster parents, but we are certified to care for them overnight during long periods of time. There's a lot of rules around this. And we were able to support Abraham, Adam, and their mom by doing these overnights, by taking them to the zoo for a day so she could take a shower and eat a meal and take a nap or watch a movie. Because we had already been trained in how to care for all of these needs that we had. But people showed up and brought us meals every 3 days. We tossed out a lot of salad. Everyone brings you salad. But we ate so well and had food for ourselves as we cared for these boys who were confused and hurting and scared. And so that's how our community showed up for us in that placement.
Yeah, I think as we've been talking about, specifically thinking about the idea of our engagement with our community as a whole, with our church community, with our friends community, with family, and the overlap of all these different communities, I think we had this idea of like, hey, we're going to do this thing, we're going to support our community, by doing foster care, by investing in these kids. And we had the opportunity to do that, but we were only able to do that because of our community supporting us as well. This was not something that we could do in isolation. There were so many times with each of our foster placements that we were drowning, that we were living hour by hour. I don't know if we're going to be able to do this tomorrow. And we have people from our community who providing meals, driving us to places, showing up in so many different ways that enabled us to do what we were called to. And that connection to the community is the only way that we have been able to do this. And so I think our idea of like, hey, this is the service that we're going to provide, there was so much more that was fed into us, that was served to us, that has been, through each of our placements. And there's so many pieces of that. There was preparation that we did ahead of time. We knew, at least on an intellectual level, we can't do this on our own, right? And so we were reaching out to the different people in our community to say, okay, so what happens, we don't know exactly what we're getting into. How do we build the support network ahead of time and build these relationships? And so there was certainly formal training through the foster system, through the foster agency we were a part of. There were conversations with friends and family and church members and different people that we had connection with, that we tried to lay that groundwork ahead of time. So that way, in those moments of crisis, we already had some sort of system. We weren't in crisis mode trying to build a parachute while we're falling. And there were so many ways. So I think for us, I think so many of the big blessings of ways people showed up for us. Meals we talked about. We had people who would come and just clean our house while we're, on an hour and a half of sleep for the last 3 nights after multiple, emergency room visits and trying to juggle all these different things. To have somebody who would just show up and not, let's sit down and have coffee and have a conversation. I don't have bandwidth for that right now, but let me show up and clean your house. And we'll bring a meal and I'll bring you a coffee and just find some way to connect there. Those were such incredible blessings for us to have just that little bit of a breath to come up for air when we were so overwhelmed. Drives, deliveries, we'd have people, hey, I've got to get whatever it is, some, random supply, whatever it is, whether it's clothing boxes or, things that we need. It is a challenge to, load 2 kids up, especially with medical needs, to try to go and pick something up. So to say, can you run to the store and grab this for me? And then in addition to that, we tried to maintain some sort of, some pretense of normal life. with our normal routines, people that we would meet with regularly, and having, whether that was having meals together or just normal life stuff that wasn't, so our entire life wasn't completely centered around foster care, but having some level of normalcy built in as well with the community connections we already have were part of how we tried to maintain sanity through that. And I think you want to talk about Alex as well, and kind of the story there. I think that was.
So we had said yes and no. So how the state works, we were with an agency, so the state puts out a blast and says we have this child or these children of this age with these. Sometimes you get needs, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have a lot of history, and sometimes you have nothing to go on. And so we had gotten calls for twins. We had gotten calls for older kids, for younger kids. And we always kind of took it at that call and saying, like, God, what is this, a yes or a no for us? Because if we say no, that's someone else's yes to stepping into that space. And so we had gotten a call. We were at our weekly Tuesday night dinner, had gotten a call for a 7-year-old coming in from out of state, was going to be split up from his younger brother. And this would be his 6th placement in
Sixth or seventh placement in 2 years.
In 2 years.
Just bounced around a lot.
And if you have any sort of trauma background, you can see and understand, or even as a parent or grandparent, you can understand how that would be absolutely devastating to a child, to be moved and moved and moved and moved, and maybe never even being given reasons why. So we have a very scared 7-year-old dropped off with us. They literally are just like, here's the paperwork, here's what we know, good luck. We'll see you, at the next meeting. And so this was right before Christmas. This was early December. And we immediately...
2019, little foreshadowing 2019. There. Coming up there.
Early December. We had people say, and Ben's family, we're close with Ben's family, they're all in Loveland. Of course, Alex is his name. Alex can come to family Christmas. Like, what does he like? What does he not like? How can we make him feel loved and welcomed here as well? And then with our dinner crew, just welcoming him in, not asking nosy questions, not saying or asking things of us in front of him, just being very aware of this is a kiddo who has lived trauma that a lot of us can't quite wrap our minds around. And then in early 2019, Alex began to feel safer with us, which, if you know, that usually means they feel more comfortable expressing their emotions in lots of different ways. And we had people, again, in our home often, who weren't scared by this. They had done enough work to know some of the background of being trauma-informed, who weren't scared of these outbursts, who weren't scared of his words or his actions, but just showed up and said, we're going to wash your dishes while you support him through this. And then March 2020 happened. And suddenly this child, who is still getting to know us and feeling safe with us, is told that in-person visits with his mom are moved to online, being told that now we are his teachers because he can't go to school. And suddenly our world became very, very, very small. And we had our bubble, our people who, again, showed up. And we went on so many walks because that was one of the most regulating things for him and us. We walked all the time. And they would show up and say, hey, can we take Alex for a walk so you guys can have half an hour to take a deep breath, to gird your loins for the next thing, to prep dinner, to have a cup of coffee, to whatever that needed to look like.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges for us, and for Alex as well throughout that, was we were initially told this is going to be a 2 to 4 week transition while he is coming from out of state to reunify with his parents. And then 9-10 months later, we actually were able to have some level of reunification. But through, that transition from him having bounced around to different locations and having this expectation of, hey, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, the end is in sight, and then COVID, and then, challenges with his parents and legal setbacks and a number of things. And we were always 2 to 4 weeks away from some sort of conclusion for that entire summer, for most of that year. And so the uncertainty for all of us, especially for this kid who has never had any stability really at any point in his life, but trying to look towards what does this look like? And so obviously very challenging for everyone involved, but so much grace from the people around us, whether it was, once again, family, church, friends, neighbors who provided support during that time frame, to not hold him to this expectation of this is the behavior that you're supposed to have, because this is what a normal kid would do, whatever that means, but to say, hey, this is where he's at, this is what he needs, and if he has a day where everything is great and happy and then he snaps and immediately he's running away or calling names or angry or fighting or hitting or whatever it is, that's not because there's something broken with him. It's because he needs that love and stability to help him to cope with that. And so for our community to gather around that, and then also in the middle of that to give us space. And so, whether it was friends, going for a walk with us or taking him for a walk, or our neighbors who bought him a pair of work gloves and, here's a shovel, come dig in the garden with us, or, those things to say, how do we, in the middle of a pandemic where the world is shut down, where his world certainly is shattered more than most, how do we find some stability and some support for him in that, and doing that in a way that, once again, was trauma-informed, not trying to hold him to a specific standard, but meet him where he is, recognize that the way that he's acting out is not because he wants to be mean and call names and, hit, but that he's reacting to a place of being overwhelmed. His ability to cope is genuinely overwhelmed, and giving him grace for that was huge. I think there's a lot of things that throughout our foster experience we've had people say to us, and there's been amazing support, so specifically the people who have met us and met our foster kids where they're at, and had not this expectation of behavior. I think, for both of us coming from very legalistic, conservative, dogmatic Christian backgrounds that have a very specific standard of behavior, to have an environment where you say, hey, it's okay for a kid to act out and to not have their act together, and we're not going to try to hold him to the same standard that we might to everybody else, but that each person is an individual, and we're going to treat them as the individual for who they are. I think that was a huge impact for us. Something that we talked about as well was a lot of the comments that are challenging in foster care. There are a lot of things that are things that, when we tell people, hey, we have been in foster care, we've been doing this, we've adopted, and there are a lot of things that people say that I think maybe could be more informed, more supportive. So I think specific comments, a lot of times people will say, oh, you do foster care, well, I could never do that because one of the most common things is, it would be too hard for me to give the kids back up. And I get the heart and the intention behind that, because of course we all feel that, like, if we love this child, we don't want to give them up. But the objective with foster care, with adoption, with loving our community, is not ownership. It's not claiming them of this is my child now and I am the best solution for them, but rather is, what can we do to serve this child where they are? And if that means adoption, like for Brooklyn, if that means reunification, if that means there are any number of outcomes that could be the best next outcome there. And we don't, something that we've talked about specifically is we don't own these kids. We do not have this claim of they're ours now. And so the idea of, like, well, I could never do that because it would be too difficult, I think quite frankly, it's a cop-out. It is putting, the protecting my feelings more than the child, who is actually in this situation where they are deeply hurt and traumatized. And so I think that's a common reoccurring thing that we've tried to cautiously, graciously push back on and say, no, this is not the point. The point is not, can we protect ourselves in it, but how do we actually serve these kids? Another thing that's common that we've specifically discussed was the assumption that the best outcome for these kids in foster care is to be adopted by this amazing family. But recognizing that at the heart of any foster care situation is loss, is a family that has been broken. And there are times when the next best outcome in this specific situation may be adoption. But an assumption that the best outcome for these kids is to take them away from their parents who are bad and evil and put them with a family that is healthy and good is so flawed on so many levels. And something that we've specifically tried to do is in our engagement with our community and in our support and conversation with people around us is recognize that these families are good. And even when there is hurt and abuse and trauma and brokenness, these people are worthy of respect and honor and dignity. And if there is a way for us to maintain that relationship that is healthy for the children and for the parents, that is well worth the time and effort and heartbreak involved in doing that.
If you didn't know, we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. So we'll try and be done soon.
Sure. You want to?
With Brooklyn. So speeding ahead. Brooklyn is our 5th placement, but we had done respite for, we had, I counted it, it was like 23 kids through our home. Whether that was through respite or...
Sometimes just for a day or two, and sometimes for...
But Brooklyn was our 5th. All of our other children reunified or went to next of kin to be raised by people that they were born from. And we have maintained contact with our older 2 to a degree. They actually just moved back overseas to Kuwait. But we have maintained contact with them. And with Brooklyn, we were not expecting. We got a call Christmas Eve 2021 saying, we have a baby. She's ready for discharge. She just needs a home for the weekend. We don't want her to spend Christmas in the hospital. So we said, yes, we'll be there. We'll be there in 2 hours. Within 2 hours, people had dropped off. Like, my sister living with us at the time had gone and like scrounged the stores Christmas Eve for a preemie Christmas outfit. So this baby would have like, it was the cutest thing. And it was still too big for her. Another friend had gone under her house into her crawl space and said, I'm dropping off a bassinet. What else do you need? Someone said, I'm gonna leave some food in your fridge so you have something when you get back from the hospital tonight. Obviously, we have now adopted Brooklyn. And we could share more about that story sometime. But the community care in that has looked even different. Part of our community in caring for Brooklyn has actually been her biological family. So her paternal grandparents have showed up, her paternal uncle, aunts, cousins, extended family have all showed up to say, we love her, we love you, and we want to support this. We believe that this is the next best thing. The best thing would be to have no broken relationship here, right? But the next best thing is for her to be here with you. And we have maintained that relationship. And it has been part of our community care, part of caring for this 4-year-old who loves to speak into the microphone now. When did that happen? Is her biological family coming around her and saying, you belong here, you belong with us. And so our family has not gotten smaller, our family has just gotten bigger through the years of foster care.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think kind of wrap up with that is that, our community continues to grow as we've connected to different families, that it's not a, foster care and adoption is not a transplanting of a child from one family to another. It's a connection of our family for Brooklyn, to her family, and our family, our community has grown. There's a prayer that I ran across maybe a year or 2 ago that keeps coming back to me, and I've tried to dig up the origin of it, and it's been attributed to a number of different people at different times and different variations. So rather than trying to say, well, this is the history of it, I'll just read this kind of to close us here. So this is a prayer that is a prayer of, called a prayer of approach or a prayer of greeting, specifically for coming to people in a new space and a new time. I honor your path. I drink at your well. I bring an unprotected heart to our meeting place. I hold no cherished outcome. I will not negotiate by withholding, and I am not subject to disappointment. I think that's a philosophy we've tried to hold specifically with foster care, but not having our specific, this is the outcome that we are holding to. This is our expectations, but with our call, our gifting as part of the body of Christ, as part of our community, we're bringing our gifts to this space and not having a set expectation, but coming to see what is here for us, how do we speak into this, and how do we connect with different people in different places the way that we need to.
Yeah, like I said, we could talk for hours, so.
That's probably